I'm Grant Walker. Welcome to Last Call for Wednesday the 15th of July. I'll be back with Heads Up Thursday 10 a.m. And now the key points to the Iran nuclear deal. Iran has agreed to constraints on its nuclear program. The Obama administration says the deal will ensure that Tehran is at least 1 year away from being able to amass enough nuclear material for a bomb for a decade. This breakout time will shrink thereafter. So, Iran will remove 2/3 of its centrifuges, machines that enrich uranium, will maintain its stockpile of enriched uranium below 300 kg, won't produce enriched uranium over 3.67% purity for 15 years, and will change the design of its Arak plutonium reactor so it won't produce weapons-grade material. Iran can keep all 3 of its nuclear facilities in use, though it will only be able to enrich uranium in one of them. After 15 years, Iran could significantly rev up its enrichment program. Iran must allow comprehensive monitoring of its nuclear and non-nuclear facilities, including rarely granted access to its nuclear supply chain, such as uranium mines and centrifuge plants, for up to 25 years. The 6 power groups, the US, UK, Russia, China, Germany and France, will cooperate with Iran to help modernize parts of its civilian nuclear program. Once it has implemented key steps to scale back its nuclear program, Iran will win relief from European Union, US and UN energy, financial and commercial sanctions. Implementation is expected by early 2016. Iran stands to get back more than US $100 billion in oil revenue stuck overseas under US sanctions once the deal is implemented. Among the steps Iran must address in coming months, its past nuclear work that may have been aimed at gaining nuclear weapons know-how. It's likely that some issues will remain unresolved before sanctions are lifted. US non-nuclear sanctions, including on energy and financial dealings with Iran, will remain. So will UN constraints on Iran's buying and selling of arms and ballistic missiles for up to 5 and 8 years respectively. Iran must also use a specific procurement channel to buy products that can be used in a nuclear program. And finally, if Iran cheats on the nuclear deal, there will be a relatively quick sanctions snapback mechanism in the US and the EU. However, it could take up to 65 days for UN sanctions to snap back into effect.
In further agriculture news, PGG Wrightson, the rural services firm controlled by China's Agria Corp, will take a 50% stake in Agrocentro Uruguay for an undisclosed amount, made up of an upfront payment and capped earnouts over the next 3 years. It said in a statement the Christchurch-based company will buy half of the Uruguayan Rural Services Company, which is already Wrightson's largest seeds customer. Wrightson has been involved with Agrocentro since its inception in 2007. Wrightson executives weren't immediately available for comment. Wrightson Group General Manager of Seed and Grain, John McKenzie, said this investment makes good strategic sense for both parties. We have common goals for the future, and this alignment of interest sets the business up well for future growth and complements PGG Wrightson's existing South American operations well. The move comes several years after Wrightson sold its management contract with New Zealand Farming Systems Uruguay, the dairy farmer it set up in 2006 in an attempt to buy cheap land in Uruguay suitable for dairy conversion and export New Zealand's intensive farming techniques into South America. In 2012, Singaporean commodities company Olam International bought 78% of Farming Systems, changing the agreement with Wrightson and opting out of a preferred supplier agreement with the company. Agrocentro developed technology systems in meat production and forage-based seed production. It has 4 business units, including retail and distribution of agricultural inputs, farming, logistics and consulting. It employs 120 people and has 8 retail branches. Wrightson has upgraded its forecast for annual earnings twice this year and expects annual operating earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortisation to be between $66 to $69 million in the year ended June 30, up from $58.7 million a year earlier. It also warned weak farmer confidence may weigh on future sales. The company's shares were unchanged at 47 cents and have gained 2.2% since the start of the year.
I'm John Stewart. It's Monday the 15th and I'm joined by Nathan Smith to talk about his think piece on the housing market. Nathan, you talk about a crisis for the middle class. What do you mean by that?
Well, at least since the 1960s, the message driven, I guess, percolating down to most parts of the demography, especially in the Western world, has been one of expectation. Not only should you expect to go to university, that university degree should get you a job. That job should give you periodic promotions and pay rises. It should lead you to buying your own home. Eventually, after all that is over, you should eventually get a retirement plan and a pension. None of that is true anymore, or at least none of that is expected anymore. It may have been during the 60s and 70s, but even then it was tenuous. But that is still the message. And that message has come to, hit the realities of the economic system, which don't allow for that anymore. If you do not upskill, if you do not train yourself after university, if you do not continue to do that sort of thing, there is no guarantee that you will keep your job for life. And in fact, life jobs don't exist anymore. But that leads to very interesting things for the housing market, because if the message is still the same, yet the economy has moved on, then what does that do to the people that discover that the expectation is ripped out from underneath them like a carpet? Well, you get reactions, and one of these reactions from an individualistic culture, which you need to have in order to sell goods in a consumer society, you get an attack on the identity, attack on the person. It feels like they get what's known as a narcissistic injury. It's not just that you're getting rid of my livelihood.
Can you explain that a little more clearly?
Yeah, sure.
A narcissistic injury.
Yeah, sure. So
an injury to their self-esteem.
An injury to who they see themselves as and who they expect others to see themselves as. That's the crucial. So Freud would have called that the superego, but we'll leave Freud over on the side for the second. The most important thing for a person who is an individualistic person or a narcissistic, with an ideology of narcissism, because it's not just a psychology, is the maintenance of the identity. And if that identity is and says, I am my job, I am the kind of person who would have this house, and then I do not get that house, or I am stopped from getting that house by an outside force.
Or that four-wheel drive.
That four-wheel drive, or that girlfriend, or that having a particular kind of family, or something. Then other people can see that, and that injures what that identity is. And there are two reactions to that. One is, especially if they're injured by a greater power, then they look for hypocrisy in that greater power. The second is violence. This is where rage comes from. Whenever you see rage, you should start looking for the injury to the narcissistic identity. And one of the forms of violence, as I point out in my piece, is how Sartre termed it. And that is the violence doesn't necessarily come from weapons. It can come from state structures like laws. The removal of freedom from people, or the interaction of arbitrary laws on certain subgroups, is a form of violence. And when people wish to enact regulations or new laws to stop or to impede, especially Chinese buyers or foreign home buyers, that is a form of violence. And that's what comes out of the rage of a society whose narcissism has been injured. And so this is all happening as a reaction to a market that is moving far quicker than that message I talked about earlier can keep up with. There is now not a coherent message of what you can expect when you're 17 years of age in 2015. It is still lagging behind.
So you're saying the underlying structure of the property market needs reform, but what is it in that structure that threatens that reform? Are you saying it's that narcissism, the possibility of injured narcissism? Yeah, sure. I mean, if narcissism is the description of society, then only narcissism will explain it. But it's not going to disappear, and neither is the direction of the market. So that message needs to be reinvigorated. Unfortunately, the advertising and all the different vectors that I will collectively call the system don't appear to wish that to eventuate, because they desire us to spend more money. The consumer culture desires us to spend more money, and unfortunately, young people not buying houses is also young people not spending money. And so the market structure, the way we message this, is still behind the reality of where we sit today. Those reforms that we're talking about, taxing and capital gains and those sorts of deals, they aren't going to change that reality. I think the narrative needs to be talked about in a more realistic way, and it's not currently. Well, we'll wrap it up there, but thanks very much for your opinions, Nathan.
NBR Radio with Bayleys, New Zealand's leading commercial real estate company.
I'm John Stewart. It's Wednesday the 15th, and I'm joined by Nathan Smith for his weekly Foreign Affairs Scope. Well, obviously the biggest news today is the Iran deal between the US, essentially, and Iran, which has been concluded in Vienna. Are all sides happy, do you think, Nathan?
Good question. Are all sides happy? The scope of the 159 pages of this particular deal are a little bit unexpected in regards to what we thought the US was wanting. They seem to have conceded quite a lot, but being the strongest party on there, they actually had a lot more to concede than anyone else. Doesn't mean, though, that there won't be follow-on talks for this, but it's a preliminary deal. It seems to be finalised. I would probably put about 80% on this in regards to your question, what they want. I think the Iranians have got some interesting side deals on this as well, especially the lifting of the arms embargo, which Russia campaigned for because obviously they like to sell arms.
Particularly to Iran, yeah.
Yeah, but what that indicates is that although we thought that getting Iran to the table required us just to talk about the nuclear enrichment, not just the nuclear program or not their bad activity in the region or their support of terrorist groups around that. All that was off the table. Right. But apparently Iran now wants to have the effects of this deal go back up that tree and affect all the other things that we thought were off the table. So It's a little bit surprising that they demanded an arms embargo and other things on the side, and yet this particular agreement will bind for 10 years. Which is important, but it will take another maybe 3 months for the adoption period to actually kick in, right, where this moves. It's now going to Congress for the next 60 days, 2 months, where it will probably be kicked back from the Republicans, who will reject this most likely outright. But President Obama said he will veto any rejection from them. So it looks like it will go through. But look, the crucial thing is that although they're talking about reassessing the reactors and reassessing the uranium enrichment, which is very important, and that some of the new reactors won't be built, or some of them will be changed into different kinds of things. As we've always known from this, it's not necessarily the reactors that we know about that we worry about. It's the ones we don't know. And also, how will Iran actually keep up with this particular deal? Will it stick to these guidelines or not? The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has been given anywhere, anytime access, but that's going to have to be very, very important. Can they get to these reactors on a short notice? That will require the Iranians to really keep up to scratch, which no one's really sure if they will or not.
But the Iranians surely will stick to their side of the bargain, because the last thing they want is the reintroduction of sanctions, which has hurt them so much. That's
right, and there is a kickback from that they will kick straight back into place if they do bust on any of these particular stipulations. They will not want, as you rightly said, a return to losing hundreds of billions of dollars from their economy, which has crippled it. And they'll be excited about bringing that money in. The political dynamics at home in Iran may change because of that influx of money, as they did in the past, and as all money influxes do in any country. But they have a lot to win on this as well. They want to start getting their oil ramped back up to export levels. Well, isn't that going to have an impact on international oil prices if they flood the market? Yeah, the lag on that will be quite hefty. They are in a quite dilapidated state, a lot of their energy infrastructure. Right. So at minimum it will be before the end of the year before they start to ramp up more energy process. But they do have a lot stockpile that they can put into the market almost immediately. But that just indicates how much more investment from foreign direct investment from other countries, Europe, America, is waiting on the wings of this deal to go in and bring to Iran what it has been waiting for a long time, and that is a modern information technology economy. So everybody is a little bit excited about this, which they should be. Security in the region is tentative because of this, but the region has been preparing for this. Israel has been realizing this is coming. Saudi Arabia and the GCC states also.
Although Israel this morning were making it clear they're not at all happy.
They really don't have a lot of say, unfortunately, for them. They don't have a lot of power. No. Sure, they're angry. They're too far away to do anything about this, and they're too small. And America's not listening to them as much as they used to anymore, and neither are they listening to the Saudis. So the change of power dynamics in the region has been gradually moving on for a while now, and it has reached a massive milestone with this rapprochement. But we'll see where it goes next. The ball really is in Iran's court to stay within these stipulations.
Well, let's cross the border into Iraq. Just tell us how this Anbar offensive is working out, Nathan.
Yeah. The Iraqi security forces launched this week an offensive into Anbar, which is west of Baghdad, one of the largest regions. It is the largest region in Iraq, home to the major cities of Fallujah, which you'll remember from the US-led coalition back in 2003, and also Ramadi, which ISIS recently retook. They are working on a methodical approach to move from major city to major city, clearing behind them as they move. This is similar to the tactics they used in Tikrit earlier in the year. But Tikrit was a different kettle of fish to Fallujah. ISIS have been embedded in Fallujah for almost a year now, probably more than a year. They will have concentric rings of IEDs. They will have blockages. They will use similar tactics as they did in Tikrit, which was the antagonistic mobile attacks. They can't fix them. They've already sent out, reports are saying they've already sent out some of their families, so they're preparing to dig in. They won't give up Fallujah very easy, so it will be costly for the Iraqi security forces, which, interestingly enough, are being led by Iranian proxies, which goes back to what I was talking about before.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. How
right.
strong a presence do these Iranian proxies, presumably they're Shias, how much impact are they having?
Well, there's multiple fronts in this particular offensive. Some are being taken care of with the Sunnis from Baghdad. Others are being taken care of by the Iranian proxies. And while neither the twain shall meet in this, they're not fighting together as such.
No. Both
are being supported by US coalition airstrikes. So they are fighting, but they're not fighting together, but they're fighting in the right direction. But look,
and being pretty methodical about it by the time.
Yeah, and they will walk through. It will be. They lost a lot of people in Tikrit. They learned a lot of lessons, however. Hopefully, they can bring those to bear in Fallujah and Ramadi over the next couple of weeks. But depending on how long this particular offensive will last, look, it really shows that the initiative is being regained by the Iraqi security forces away from ISIS, which is very crucial. The Ramadan offensive that they started about a month ago now, because it finishes on July 17, was purported to be one of the deadliest offensives over the last year. And by all accounts, the amount of attacks that ISIS tried would have made it that way. Not only did they have problems when they came up to the Kurds and the Iraqi security forces, but actually a lot of their vehicle bombs weren't as effective as they thought they would be, or simply didn't go off. So the Ramadan offensive has been stopped quite significantly, and now, like I said, the initiative is being turned around for the Iraqi state, which counters the narrative of ISIS, which is a crucial thing to do.
Absolutely. Not good for their propaganda.
Not at all.
No. Now, just moving westward to Greece, it appears that Syriza had to completely fold under pressure from Europe.
Yeah, look, reality wins out in the end of the day. Despite the rhetorical lectures from the finance minister about macroeconomics, whereas the creditors want to talk about microeconomics and austerity and pensions, it was like playing tennis with a brick wall. Really, the creditors weren't going to budge, and they haven't budged. But Syriza has to go back to the Greek people and sell essentially what they've folded to incorporate. An interesting development, though, happened over the weekend where Germany is changing its tune a little bit, gave a very harsh, almost impossible choice to the Greek government. On the one hand, they asked them to essentially roll back all the reforms that Syriza had brought into place, essentially erasing the existence of Syriza at all from history.
Right.
Or they could take a time out from the Eurozone for 5 years in which they would bring all their reforms in, maybe restructure some of the debt, but then maybe bring them back later on afterwards. But both sides, both options would destroy the party. It's unclear exactly what Tsipras, the Greek Prime Minister, chose, but it wasn't an easy choice. Interestingly enough, that response, that impossible choice came from Germany, which in the past has campaigned extensively to avoid a collapse or a fragmentation of the European Union, and yet they suggested that Greece remove itself from the Eurozone temporarily, obviously. But still it's showing that there's a little bit of different thinking happening in Berlin, in which they're not so happy with fighting this fight anymore, trying to maintain the integrity of the European Union. Maybe it's not worth it anymore. And it sort of comes back to the problem of having a currency union without having a fiscal union. When not everyone has this right idea or the same idea about what you want to do with your funds, this kind of thing happens. And
so you're saying we should have one single banking system for the whole Eurozone?
Well, there already is to an extent.
I know there's the
what I am
central
saying,
bank.
What I am saying is, rather than treating them, the European members, as Germans and Greeks and French and Italians, they haven't treated themselves as a European project in the way that we thought they would. And there is still the animosity between not just Northern Europe and Southern Europe, but Greeks and Germans and French and Germans, and they still call themselves nationalistic names, and that doesn't bring the European project together in the way that we thought it would. And I think Germany's starting to see that maybe there are bigger problems than just letting Greece leave here. The fragmentation and the destruction of the European Union, that might be a larger problem than just letting Greece sort of collapse for a little bit, move over to the side, and then maybe bring it back. But that is a very different narrative.
Yeah, well, I mean, the French are the second largest economy, aren't they, in the Eurozone? So where do they sit in all this discourse?
Well, France is a northern and a southern economy. It attaches itself to the North European plain in the top, but also has ports in the Mediterranean. So it is both. But the European Union as a currency was the French idea, not a German idea. And the connection of Berlin and Paris is integral. If they split, then the European Union collapses. If they come together on what they want out of Greece, then maybe they can move forward. But we're already starting to see some tensions between Paris and Berlin, and that's also worrying.
Okay, we'd better wrap it up there, Nathan, but thanks very much for your weekly Foreign Affairs scope.
NBR Radio with Hotel de Brett. Open for breakfast, lunch and dinner and everything in between. NBR Radio.
In investment news, Pledge Me has cleared its minimum equity crowdfunding goal of $250,000 in its second capital raise in 9 months. The crowdfunding platform has so far raised more than $269,500, with 9 days left to try to attract the maximum $750,000 for a 25.6% stake of the company. Pledge Me Chief Executive Anna Gunther says the company is happy to have already reached the minimum. This investment means we'll be able to support more project and equity campaigns and push for further growth. The funding will be allocated to run more campaigns on the platform, hire new staff and expand the marketing budget. Ms Gunther says further funding will also mean we can properly investigate further products like crowd lending and look to expanding our equity crowdfunding service to Australia and support the discussions around their legislation changes. She says the campaign has so far attracted money from 86 investors, with at least 76 of these new shareholders. Offer documents released for this funding round show Pledge Me failed to reach its 2015 forecasts. During the November capital raise, PledgeMe had forecasted a net loss of $28,000 in the year to March 31st, 2015, but the current offer documents show it did not meet forecasts, instead making a net loss of $57,000. The company explains the missed target by saying projections are really a dark art and are rarely hit, with 2 crowdfunding campaigns falling on the wrong side of year-end by 10 days. PledgeMe is the first equity crowdfunding platform out of 6 licensed to raise its funding using its own platform. Some of the platforms have corporate backers to keep them afloat, such as Equities, which is backed by listed investment fund Australiana Wealth Investments, and Crowdcube, which is attached to Wellington-based investment bank Armillary Capital. But others, including Snowball Effect, say using their own platform to raise capital will not be ruled out in future. Snowball's platform head, Josh Daniel, says the company has been funded so far by its founders and Antipodes Ventures, but will assess all options if further capital is required. Equity crowdfunding platforms typically make money by charging a fee based on the amount raised, conditional upon a company reaching its funding target. Therefore, a platform's revenue is dictated by 2 main factors: the amount raised and the rate of success. We have raised over 70% of the funds raised in the equity crowdfunding market with a 91% success rate, including 2 private offers. You can connect the dots between operational performance and funding requirements.
In business news, Lee's Construction carried out the largest concrete pour of the Canterbury rebuild last Saturday. Approximately 1,870 square metres of concrete was poured to form the ANZ Centre's basement. The developer is CHC Properties, jointly owned by fashion retailer, investor and rich lister Tim Glasson and fellow Hallenstein Glasson shareholder and chairman Warren Bell. Mr Glasson's involvement as developer, plus his position on the NZX-listed Hallenstein Glasson board, raised queries about conflicts of interest a few months ago. Meanwhile, the concrete job required an estimated 370 truck deliveries by Firth, tying up most of the concrete firm's capacity for the day. The ANZ Centre has been constructed on the site of the former Triangle Centre, bordering High, Cashel and Colombo streets. Lees Construction's managing director, Anthony Lees, says it's a milestone for the CBD rebuild. Mr Lees says we craned a pump into the basement and pumped the concrete into the basement area from 3 points on High Street, Cashel Street and Colombo Street. It was quite a sight. The next stage of the project will involve construction of the basement walls and columns, with a tower crane due on site at the end of the month. The state-of-the-art new 4-level building comprises ground floor retail and hospitality areas of 1,700 square metres and 3 levels of office, and is diagonally across from landmark department store Ballantyne's. ANZ Bank has taken signage and naming rights, along with 1 floor of office and ground floor retail space, while Becker has signed as the biggest office tenant. Hallenstein Glasson will take 903 square metres for its new flagship store. Negotiations are progressing with other high-profile tenants. Mr Lees is already looking ahead beyond the Christchurch rebuild. He's appointed Jeff Vivian as operations manager in Auckland, where he will seek work for the company. Mr Lees set up the company about 20 years ago. Recent and current projects in Canterbury include the ANZ and BNZ centres, Rangiruru Girls School, Blue Skies Development, the Hub, plus the Burwood Health Campus in Christchurch, one of the largest hospital building projects in New Zealand's public health service. Lees is a construction company rather than a developer.
I'm John Stewart. It's Wednesday the 15th. Sir Stephen Tyndall's investment vehicle and ex-Sonar 6 Chief Executive Mike Carden are among the latest investors to take a bite of software company Ask Nicely. Callida Smiley's been covering that story. Callida, what other experienced investors have put money into this venture?
Well, a number of angel investment groups have come on board. The initial round in December, which raised about $300,000, the Ice Angels were involved, and also the NZVIF. And the second investment round also involved Angel HQ and Enterprise Angels.
Now, Ask Nicely, it's a software firm, but can you tell us a bit more?
Yes, I think it was invented to help companies increase their customer retention and referrals. It works by asking the companies just a single question, customers about a single question, how likely they are to recommend the specified business, and then shows the companies in real time their responses.
It's had big international growth. What proportion of its revenues are international?
Well, the company says that 70% of their growth and their revenues is international.
Who are their local clients?
They include Xero, Vend, Mighty River Power and Slingshot.
Now, there was a seed round in December. Was that a quick event in raising the capital?
Yes, the Ice Angels told me that it raised, well, as I said, 300,000, and it was the fastest capital raise in their history, with just 53 days from when the company was introduced to potential investors to the documents being signed and money in the bank.
So what has Ask Nicely done with that money it raised?
They've been forming their business plan, they've been attracting more customers, and they've been switching their focus to an international focus.
Callida, thanks for that.
You're listening to NBR Radio. Upgrade to My NBR Radio with a smartphone-only subscription to NBR Online today for free and receive unlimited access to NBR Online on your smartphone until August 31st. Visit www.nbr.co.nz/free.
To Auckland rates, Auckland ratepayers can now check what their new rates bill is via the council's website. Approximately 80% will face an increase of less than $500 and 51,000 will enjoy a decrease. An estimated 9,000 properties, or 2% according to the council, will have to contend with rates rises of $1,000 or more. Yesterday, Auckland Council copped flack for spending at least $60,000 and up to $90,000 on contacting the ratepayers who will be hardest hit by rises, about 12,000 by phone and 77,000 by letter. The council was unapologetic about the expense. In a statement, General Manager for Financial Plan, Policy and Budget, Matthew Walker, said, "We take our responsibility to communicate with Auckland ratepayers seriously and make no apology for calling those most affected by the changes to this year's rates." He said in this case the calls were an opportunity to explain a complex set of changes to those affected the most and to make sure they knew what help and support was available where they may have difficulty paying. This morning, Mayor Len Brown blamed an increasingly antiquated rating system for the sharp rises experienced by some. He told Radio New Zealand one of the real flaws in our rating system is that there is nothing that we can do about those who have extraordinarily high revaluations, that over the 3-year period their increase in house value, in fact their asset value, may have increased by 50, 60, 70, even 80 or 90%. As reported by NBR 2 weeks ago, later this month, Local Government New Zealand will release its Local Government Funding Review, which seeks to identify funding alternatives to property value rates that disproportionately charge home and landowners on behalf of the whole community. Individual councils are also independently investigating other options. Central government doesn't appear to have any appetite for changing the rating system, however, with Prime Minister John Key having noted that wholesale restructuring and reform of the way local government is funded is not something we have on the agenda at this time. In tech news, Sir Stephen Tyndall's investment vehicle K1W1 and ex-Sonar 6 Chief Executive Mike Carden are among the latest investors to take a bite of software company Ask Nicely. Ask Nicely is a cloud-based software platform that lets businesses see in real time which customers are happy or not and why, to try to increase customer retention and referrals. It uses a Net Promoter Score framework, which the likes of Apple, Amazon, Vodafone and Virgin also use, to track customer loyalty, and asks customers how likely they are to recommend the specified business. Since launching late last year, the software as a service company says it has had strong international growth, with 70% of its revenues coming from outside New Zealand. Local customers include Xero, Vend, Slingshot and Mighty River Power. Aaron Ward, who co-founded the company with John Ballinger, says word of mouth now influences 80% of purchase decisions. He said you can see customer satisfaction at a brand, channel, agent or customer level and fix problems before a customer leaves or posts a scathing review online. Ask Nicely has successfully completed 2 rounds of seed funding, raising about $1 million. The initial seed round in December raised about $300,000 from Ice Angels and the New Zealand Venture Investment Fund, and set a record as the fastest capital raise in Ice Angels history, 53 days from an introduction to documents signed and money in the bank. Mr. Ward says over the past 6 months, the Auckland-based company has used this money to flesh out its business plan, attract paying customers, and switch its focus from selling the software to large corporates in New Zealand to mid-market businesses globally. A second investment round has just closed, with just over $600,000 raised to help scale up global sales and marketing efforts. 2 investors were granted an extension and are due to contribute another $100,000. The second capital raise involved the initial investors as well as Wellington's Angel HQ and Tauranga's Enterprise Angels. It attracted the likes of Sir Stephen Tyndall's investment vehicle K1W1 and Mike Carden, who sold his SAAS company Sonar 6 offshore in 2012. While Ask Nicely management will not disclose forecasts and valuations, the company is at the seed stage, for which Ice Angels reports valuations are generally in the $1 to $1.8 million range. The company will look to do a Series A capital raise next year, with the amount raised likely to be between $2 to $5 million based on how much traction it gets in the next 6 to 9 months. Offshore investment will also be sought for this round. Ask Nicely is chaired by John O'Hara, who also sits on the boards of Tate Radio Communications, Naked Bus and Spider Tracks.
I'm John Stewart. It's Wednesday the 15th. The debate itself over foreign investors is fuelling Auckland house prices. Chris Hutching is joining me now. Chris, why is the debate itself having this effect?
Well, it's part of a wider debate that's going on around the Pacific. It's happening in Australia, it's happening in Canada, and some of the island states. So it's something that I think a lot of people know about. In Australia, they have taken a more proactive stance in our government. They've set up a much tighter regime for identifying foreign buyers, which they do, and they've also, over the past couple of months, introduced some quite hard-hitting rules. And if you break those rules, there are some pretty significant fines. And the Australian Foreign Investment Review Board, which is the equivalent of our Overseas Investment Office, is taking this pretty seriously. They've got about a couple of hundred cases that they're looking at the moment to make sure that people have kept within the rules.
Yeah, I mean, you do hear chatter that people, overseas buyers, are finding their way around these rules.
Yes, well, that's right. No rules will ever be, completely watertight, so to speak. But the thing that Labor's Andrew Little, leader, has been calling for is a register at least. And this is something that the national government has been resisting. Stephen Joyce is sort of behaving a bit like one of those racehorses that refuses to go into the racing start. They obviously do not want to be seen to be pressured by an opposition group into doing something, but this whole thing is shaping up, to my mind, to being one of the defining issues of any upcoming election, because the prices are getting so out of kilter now, 10 times average household earnings, annual earnings, and the weight of capital that's coming in, I'm afraid, look, there's no other way of looking at it. It must be coming in from overseas. You don't get 26% average price increases over a year in a normal market. It's quite bizarre what's going on, and there's a general reluctance, I think, of the current government to actually look at this thing face on.
So when it comes to a register, Andrew Little's calling for that, similar to Australia's. But the government is in a de facto way by asking for local tax numbers for foreign investors. Is, as I say, de facto setting up a register. Is Mr. Little's concerned that register won't be publicly available?
Yes, that's one of the main issues, and of course there is some veracity in the government's defence of that, because you don't necessarily want to fuel any kind of xenophobia or racism, whereby people might get hold of registers and start to make things out of them. But I think the government needs to be informed, and at the moment it doesn't want to be, or that is the appearance that we're getting anyway, that it doesn't actually want to know about these things. And then, of course, the whole debate on this is turned around as a racist one. I've seen some reports in some overseas newspapers today where they're talking about it becoming a race war. And, I think that is very disingenuous. I don't think that's the case at all. But we do have plenty of anecdotal evidence that there is a weight of capital coming in from overseas, and this is a huge problem for Aucklanders in particular.
Indeed it is. Now, Chinese buyers have doubled the worth of their Australian purchases between 2013 and 2014. Do you think we could see a similar trend here?
Well, I think we already are seeing a similar trend. And, of course, we need to remember that there are people on the other side of this equation, Kiwis on the other side of this equation, who are very happy about this because they're the ones that are selling property. And they wouldn't have anything like the number of buyers if there wasn't this frenzy going on at the moment. And, of course, the real estate companies are pretty keen to downplay it, even though many of those in Auckland now employ large numbers of Asian agents in order to be able to take advantage of this growing trade. And in fact, one of the leading companies there, I noticed yesterday, about 20 out of its top 25 agents have Asian names, which is not to say that they're not Kiwi New Zealanders. We've got to keep that in mind, that we have many people of Asian descent in this country who have been here for generations. So, we don't want this thing to escalate into some sort of racist debate, which is why I'm inclined to use the word foreign buyers or foreign investors as opposed to trying to isolate any one ethnic group.
Chris, thanks for that.
NBR Radio. With Clooney Restaurant now offering Auckland's most exclusive private dining room. NBR Radio.
I'm John Stewart. It's Wednesday the 15th. New Zealand will potentially gain a new market the size of the United Arab Emirates if sanctions are lifted from Iran in the historic agreement over its nuclear program. 6 world powers have negotiated the agreement, which effectively puts a 10-year moratorium on Iran becoming a nuclear power. In his Editor's Insight, Neville Gibson looks at the potential for future trade with Iran. Neville, how important could Iran be to New Zealand's trading position?
We've had a long history of diplomatic relations with Iran going back to 1975, when an embassy was established. That's around about the same time that we established diplomatic relations with China, for example. And that's remained the case ever since, even though the Islamic Revolution in 1979 severely affected the relationship, certainly with Iran, and Iran with other countries as well. There was the seizure of the US embassy where the staff were held hostage for more than a year, and that really made Iran a bit of a pariah stake in the world's eyes, and its desire to become a nuclear power, of course, has made that worse. Now, that early trading relationship in the 1970s was dominated by frozen sheep meat. I think they took about 50% of our lamb exports, but this collapsed when the Iranians found they couldn't pay, and a lot of that frozen sheep was burnt down into fertiliser, very tragic thing. But by 2007, the trade had fallen to less than $180 million worth. That's both ways, with us selling about $130 million of dairy and wool. Meanwhile, we were mainly importing oil, about $50 million worth, and of course it's oil that got caught by the new sanctions.
So what's been the effect of the sanctions on everyday Iranian life?
Well, those sanctions were imposed by the European nations, the US and the rest of the UN members who wanted to do it, including New Zealand. That started around about the end of 2011. And effectively, as far as the Iranians were concerned, it really cut their oil export revenue by half, shut down the banking system. The currency, called the rial, went into a free fall, and there was hyperinflation getting as high as 60%. By October, 2 years later, in 2013, Iran had a very severe balance of payments crisis, and that really triggered off these talks. And Iranians haven't gone starving or anything like that. The size of their economy is still around $400 billion, which, as you said at the beginning, is about the equivalent of the United Arab Emirates. And it's been estimated that if Iran returns to the world community as a trading country, its economy could grow by up to 7% a year for quite a number of years.
Well, apart from oil, what other potential does Iran offer?
Although Iran is mainly known as an oil exporter, and that has certainly dropped off, it's got quite a sophisticated, if outdated, infrastructure in terms of roading and manufacturing. It's got a highly educated population. Graduates from its universities are highly sought after even in America, for their skills in engineering. As far as I can make out from reading Iranian books on Iran, talking to people who have been there, they've got fairly Western tastes. In fact, the population seems to be a little bit pent up, even though they've got these Islamic rulers are very much against the West. The population of Iran seems to have quite a different idea. As far as the type of products that New Zealand can sell there, we're already quite well established in a small way before the sanctions cut off the banking system in areas like education, electronics, software, geothermal, natural gas technology, even air traffic control, of course agricultural technology and construction. All of these have been items New Zealand has traded with Iran.
So how large is the Iranian market?
Well, you're talking a much larger population than Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. Saudi Arabia's got about 30 million people. Iran's got 80 million. Now, of those 80 million, 60% are under the age of 30, mainly due to the big war it had with Iraq a decade or so ago. And as I say, they're very keen on aspects of Western culture. We know that Twitter has got a very strong foothold there, and smartphones are owned by a good chunk of the population, at least half of it, and that includes the whole country, have got access to internet. And of course, if you go to Tehran, which is a very cosmopolitan city, you've got very high internet access. And tourists have told me that the shops are full of imported goods. They get it there one way or another, things like designer jeans, sunglasses, all those sort of Western things. You can buy Coca-Cola there, although it's done through a local company. And if you do find New Zealand goods, they're likely to come from Fonterra.
So how soon will some of this projected trade happen?
Well, New Zealand trade people will be keeping a very close eye on just how quickly this Vienna Agreement pans out. It's got to be signed off, of course, by the American Congress and in Iran itself. In Iran, really, those sanctions won't come off until Iran starts delivering on its part of the deal and that nuclear wind-down starts taking effect. But New Zealand companies with an interest in the Middle East have been in regular contact with the Iranian embassy in Wellington, which is quite an active embassy. New Zealand and Iran have signed a number of agreements, and they have what's called a Political and Economic Cooperation Commission. It hasn't met for a while, but it soon can. And, of course, internationally, there's going to be quite a stampede of major multinational companies. The only ones who got a real foothold in there during the period of the sanctions have been ones with humanitarian exemptions like hospital equipment, but I guess the first ones that will be in there will be the oil companies, because Iran's oil industry is very run down. You've got car manufacturers. I don't think there's any modern cars in Iran. I think they made a version of the old Morris Oxford.
Another Cuba with its old American cars.
They can't really get access to that sort of technology. And, of course, the aeroplane makers, Airbus and Boeing, are rubbing their hands with glee because at the Paris Air Show a few weeks ago, Iran's transport minister was there and he said the industry over the next 10 years needs about 400 new jet aircraft worth about $20 billion because tourism's one of those industries that would really take off in Iran.
Neville, thanks very much for that.
Join NBR's Intelligent Business Network today. www.nbr.co.nz/subscribe. NBR.
I'm Peter McElwain and here's what's trending. The government's plan to collect more data about foreign owners is unlikely to see the debate about their fuelling Auckland house prices fade any time soon. Despite the increasing number of new entrants into New Zealand's dairy industry, there is still insufficient competition for deregulation. Orion Health Group says it's performing in line with management's expectations, and the market for healthcare IT globally is the biggest opportunity New Zealand technology has ever had. Pledge Me has cleared its minimum equity crowdfunding goal of $250,000 in its second capital raise in 9 months. PGG Wrightson's chief executive says the company's purchase of a half stake in a retail rural supplies company in Uruguay will help protect its position with its biggest customer in a market worth well over $100 million a year to the company. PGG Wrightson, the rural services firm controlled by China's Agria Corp, will take a 50% stake in Agrocentro Uruguay for an undisclosed amount. More bad news for the economy comes as farmer confidence continues to slip ahead of tonight's dairy auction. Fonterra's investment in Chinese dairy company Being Mate has taken a turn for the worse after the Shenzhen-listed company issued a loss warning yesterday, and New Zealand companies will be asked to keep records of information requests by local law enforcement agencies in a drive to shed light on the extent government entities are seeking personal data.
Market news. Goodman Property Trust, the country's second biggest listed property investor, will build a new $26.8 million cool store at its Highbrook Business Park site in Auckland. The Trust's manager, Goodman New Zealand, said in a statement the development will add a new 7,458 square metre facility at the Highbrook site, which has 8 new projects in the pipeline totalling $108.6 million. The Highbrook projects are expected to generate annual rents of $8.6 million, a yield on cost of about 7.9%. The customer signed a 15-year lease and the new development has expansion rights attached. Goodman Chief Executive John Dakin said, "We're extremely pleased to be developing a new, larger cool store for an existing refrigerated logistics customer at Highbrook. We're now more than 2/3 of the way through its planned development." Goodman Property has been increasing its development work, including a joint venture with Singapore sovereign wealth fund GIC, after selling $150 million of properties last year as part of a strategy to improve the quality of its portfolio. The Trust's units last traded at $123 and have gained 7.9% this year. The stock is rated an average hold based on 6 analyst recommendations compiled by Reuters, with a median price target of $1.17.
In health news, Orion Health Group says it's performing in line with management's expectations, and the market for healthcare IT globally is the biggest opportunity any New Zealand technology company has ever had. Company founder and chief executive Ian McRae made the comments on a conference call where he said the global healthcare IT spend was expected to grow to $70 billion by 2020, driven mainly by the burgeoning costs of healthcare that is revolutionising healthcare. And Orion Health has the strategy, technology and now the resources to pursue those opportunities. The Auckland-based healthcare software company held cash and short-term deposits of $96 million as at June 30, having generated $200,000 of operating cash flow in the 3-month period. It said on top of the $800,000 operating cash flow in the March quarter, that meant Orion Health was $1 million cash positive in the past 6 months and ahead of internal forecasts. Customer receipts were up to $63.6 million for the quarter. But the company warned it remains in growth mode, particularly in research and development and in building its software as a service business, and expects to have negative cash flow in the short to medium term as it grows capability. Chief Operating Officer Graham Wilson said it was expecting to consume cash for the rest of the fiscal year, and it does have some seasonality in its results during the Northern Hemisphere summer. Orion has about 1,200 staff and in the first quarter added 26 of 100 extra staff it plans to hire this financial year in research and development. Staff costs for the quarter were $29 million, while costs for research and development staff were an additional $14.7 million. The company's shares rose 2.3% to $3.98, having plunged well below their $5.70 initial public offering price after investors were spooked by lower than expected revenue last year. The company, whose technology facilitates the sharing of information between hospital departments, healthcare providers and health professionals, floated on the NZX last November. Orion Health said it had a number of opportunities in the pipeline globally and has a positive outlook for the rest of the 2016 financial year. Mr. Wilson said the size of our opportunities continues to increase. In some instances, we're working with customers that are bigger than our entire New Zealand health system. In its main market in North America, Orion Health secured a number of notable contracts in the past quarter, including forming a strategic partnership with eHealth Technologies to enable North Dakota Health Information Network to give healthcare providers access to medical images as part of a statewide health information exchange. It also gained a contract to support a large care coordination project in Cambridgeshire, focused on the care of the elderly, and said based on the company's continuing growth in the UK, it could become its second largest market within a few years. In Spain, Orion Health won a procurement contract to deploy its open platform for a public healthcare provider to more than 2.5 million people over the next year. It's the first such deployment in Europe of this new technology solution.
I'm John Stewart. It's Wednesday the 15th. Lee's Construction in Christchurch has carried out the largest concrete pour of the city's rebuild. Chris Hutching joins me to talk about that. Chris, who'll occupy the building?
Well, one of the tenants is going to be Hallenstein Glassons, and curiously, the owner of this property happens to be, or the co-owner happens to be, one of our rich listers, Tim Glasson, who happens to be a shareholder and director of the listed company Hallenstein Glasson. And that raised a few eyebrows some months ago because some people thought there might have been some conflict of interest. But then again, on the other hand, he might have been the most well-placed person to do it. Now, it is kind of symbolic of the rebuild because we are getting a little way through it, and I'll give you some figures about that in a minute. But as far as the concrete pour itself goes, it tied up the concrete company called Firth all day. It took about 370 deliveries.
Good
by
heavens.
Firth.
Yeah.
So she was pretty busy. They didn't have too many other clients on the go. I should tell you the name of this development. It's called the ANZ Centre because, of course, the ANZ is going to be an anchor tenant.
So they've got the naming rights.
They've got the naming rights, yes, and Hallenstein Glasson will be one of the retail tenants in that. But the ANZ Centre is quite near the BNZ Centre, which is just along the road, and we're going to see a similar-sized concrete pour there and similar sorts of building going on. So things are looking pretty interesting at the moment. Lee's Construction, which is the crowd that have built it, they're a fairly interesting company too. They were started up about 20 years ago. Anthony Lees, who runs that, he's a pretty switched-on, youthful sort of guy. They've done a lot of work around Christchurch and many different places. But they're looking at Auckland. They're looking a wee bit ahead of the rebuild, and they're thinking, well, what's going to happen after that? And so even though it's got quite a way to run yet, they've got their eye on the future. So they've actually set up an office in Auckland, and it'll be pretty interesting to see how that goes. They're not the only one that's doing that, of course, but they're doing it from a position of strength and experience now.
Indeed.
Now, the other thing I was going to talk to you about in the context of this was a thing called the Cantometer, which is put out by ASB. They've actually put out their last one today. They started it in 2011 as a way of measuring how things were going in Canterbury. And what they're saying in this last one is that the building activity has got about one-third of the way through fixing up the building damage. So there could be, two-thirds yet to go. Possibly not, because, there'll be some that won't be rebuilt. But it shows that we've still got a fair bit of building to go. The only thing that's changing is the rate of growth. The rate of growth is slowing. It's not declining. That is to say, the rebuilding is not declining, but the rate of growth is declining a bit. So we'll see a gradual change from a construction-driven economy here to a more broad-based economy. Although you'd have to say, for the sake of New Zealand, thank goodness we have this construction boom going on down here. Because when we have dairying going through the floor and some of the other economic drivers not looking quite so healthy, the construction sector is still driving things.
Chris, thanks for that.
NBR. Need to hire? Try our online recruitment platform, www.nbrtalent.co.nz.
In dairy news, despite the increasing number of new entrants into New Zealand's dairy industry, there is still insufficient competition for deregulation. Lincoln University's Senior Lecturer of Agribusiness Management, Nick Lees, says there's more competition in the dairy industry now than there has been in the past 10 years, and Fonterra has started to feel the heat. He says with the low payout, as well as Fonterra's shares dropping, many farmers have seen a lot of their equity in Fonterra erode. Despite this, Mr. Lees says the dairy giant still has a massive upper hand because of the sheer scale it has in the industry. He adds it's extremely hard for smaller companies and new entrants to compete with Fonterra because of this. This view is also held by some of Fonterra's competitors, who said in a submission to the Commerce Commission that competition in the industry is still too insufficient for deregulation. In submissions to the Commerce Commission, which is undertaking a government-ordered review of the industry's competitiveness, rival processors either want the status quo or the regulations tightened. Among the issues under investigation is whether the Dairy Industry Restructuring Act of 2001, DIRA competition thresholds have been met. The current threshold frees Fonterra from its obligation to supply milk to smaller competitors once at least 20% of supply is taken by competitors in both the North and South Islands. Fonterra currently has an 86% share of the nation's milk pool, down from 96% when it was set up in 2001. In the submission, Westland Milk Product said it was concerned actions employed by Fonterra in response to competition for milk supply at the farm gate demonstrate Fonterra has used and has the potential to continue to use its position of dominance to restrict competition, and thus there remains the need for regulation of Fonterra to sustain competition in this area. Asked if there is enough competition in the dairy industry to deregulate, some 60% of NBR poll participants say there is not, while the other 40% think there is. In housing news, the government's plan to collect more data about foreign owners is unlikely to see the debate about their fuelling Auckland house prices fade anytime soon. The debate has erupted as home ownership levels hit their lowest level since 1951 at 64%, from a 73% peak in the late 1980s. The government's Taxation, Land Information and Offshore Persons Information Bill will require non-resident home buyers to have a tax number from their home country as well as in this country, and a New Zealand bank account. The legislation is aimed at ensuring all foreign house buyers pay tax on investment properties sold within 2 years of purchase. But Labour leader Andrew Little questions whether the legislation will have a significant effect and has called on the government to set up a publicly accessible foreign buyers register. The foreign ownership debate in New Zealand echoes the same concerns in places like Vancouver and Australia. The Australians have introduced restrictions and penalties, such as restricting acquisitions by foreign buyers to new houses and providing for stiff fines if rules are breached. The federal government is investigating nearly 200 cases where rules may have been breached through a variety of mechanisms. An Australian Foreign Investment Review Board report says Chinese buyers spent more than $12 billion on housing in 2014, well ahead of the $5.9 billion the previous year, suggesting a similar trend is likely in Auckland. The Foreign Investment Review Board reports more than $35 billion of foreign money came into Australia last year, with the predominant players coming from China, followed by the United States, with Singapore in third place. In Hawaii, the foreign bugbear is Japanese buyers who are reportedly pouring money into housing there.
I'm John Stewart. It's Wednesday the 15th. Reporter Jenny Ruth in Wellington has been covering a defamation case between two professional accounting bodies. The trial came to a close yesterday as lawyers made their final statements from both sides, and now they await the judge's reserved decision. Jenny, tell me, what was said in yesterday's closings?
Right, well, the barrister for the New Zealand Institute of Chartered Accountants, Bruce Gray QC, he was arguing just about every defence that there is for defamation, that some of the statements were true, that others were genuine opinion, and that qualified privilege applied because two speeches were made to groups of accountants. He was also arguing that there was no monetary damage caused to the rival organisation, CPA Australia. However, some of the evidence covered advertisements that talked about first-class and second-class types of accountants, and Alan Galbraith QC, who was representing CPA Australia, argued that the comments were defamatory. Mr. Gray was arguing in court things like the people that CPA Australia was trying to target to get to join it were students, whereas the people that the chief operating officer of the institute, Ms. Kirsten Patterson, was talking to were actually already accountants, and most of them would have already been members of an association. And so there was a mismatch between her audience and the people likely to be affected. He's also arguing that a lot of the argument was about semantics, arguing that some statements were mere puffery and basically that there wasn't enough seriousness in the allegations to warrant a judgment being made against the Institute. It was quite interesting, some of the comments from Justice Robert Dobson, who was hearing the case. He suggested that what the Institute was doing could be characterised as saying, how dare the CPA even have the temerity to be there at all? Mr Gray argued no. He did say that the Institute was new to competition and some of its early attempts to promote itself were, quote, a bit clumsy, unquote. But he also said that the Institute had participated in the legislative process that opened up the profession to greater competition. And he also cited comments from Ms Patterson saying that she welcomed competition. Obviously, the other side doesn't think that the comments were in any way trivial. And Alan Galbraith, QC, who's representing CPA Australia, said that if you are expressing an honest opinion, that has to be based on a matter of fact, and that some of Ms Patterson's statements were based on things that were actually factually incorrect, such as she was asserting that CPA Australia was giving away iPads to new members. Now, CPA's New Zealand country manager, David Jenkins, actually gave evidence saying that that never happened, that it had been discussed, but the idea had been discarded. And Mr Galbraith reminded the court that under cross-examination, Ms Patterson had said she didn't believe what Mr Jenkins had said.
Indeed. Thanks very much.
NBR. With a National Business Review smartphone subscription, you can read or listen to the latest from NBR online. And for a limited time, it's free. Join NBR's Intelligent Business Network today and get free smartphone access to NBR online until August 31st. NBR doesn't do sport, weather or horoscopes, just timely, relevant, useful and insightful business news. So for business news you can use for free, visit nbr.co.nz/free.
In further dairy news, Fonterra's investment in Chinese dairy company Beingmate has taken a turn for the worse after the Shenzhen-listed company issued a loss warning yesterday. Fonterra bought 18.8% of Beingmate Baby and Child Food Company in March, paying 18 renminbi a share for its $192.4 million share stake. The transaction, valued at 3,464 million RMB, that's 755 million New Zealand dollars based on the exchange rate at the time, forms part of a global partnership between the two companies designed to help meet China's growing demand for infant formula and increase export volumes of Fonterra's Anmum infant formula brand. However, Beingmate is battling fierce market competition and appears to be losing market share, according to a statement it filed to the stock exchange yesterday. The company disclosed that it expects to post a net loss of 95 to 105 million yuan, which is $22 to $25 million loss for the first half of financial year 2015. That compares with a net profit of 107.8 million Chinese yuan for the same period last year. The half-year financial forecast came just before Beingmate shares came out of a trading halt made amid the turmoil on China's stock exchanges in recent weeks. The stock has halved in value since soaring to 30 yuan in late May and closed yesterday at 12.11. The shares gained 1.21 or 10% to 13.32 in early trading this afternoon New Zealand time. Beingmate attributed the forecast loss to declining sales of its key infant formula, resulting in a significant decrease in first-half operating income. It cited industry competition and the fact that the company's business transformation was not yet completed as the main reasons. The company has increased investment in product development and services, which increased its cost of sales ratio over the previous year. The statement from the board, headed by Chairman Zhentai Wang, concluded with an apology to investors for the downgrade. The expected loss follows a disappointing full-year result for 2014, which saw the company report a 90% fall in operating profit to 65.7 million yuan, that's $13.9 million, compared with 721 million yuan the previous year. Revenue fell 17% in 2014. Fonterra is responding to NBR Online's request for comment, which requires contacting a representative in China. The cooperative has previously said the Being Mate investment is expected to deliver long-term value to Fonterra. In farming news, more bad news for the economy comes as farmer confidence continues to slip ahead of tonight's dairy auction. The latest figures from federated farmers reveal farmers are becoming more pessimistic about their profitability and New Zealand's economy. Federated Farmers National President William Roddeston says one of the most concerning elements the figures revealed was farmers' debt. More than a quarter of respondents expect to take on more debt to service their farms over the next year. Dr. Roddeston says farmers have been taking on more debt because they have negative cash flows. He says they won't be taking on more debt because they're out buying new farms. A higher proportion of farmers expects to reduce spending to levels of sentiment not seen since the global financial crisis, the figures suggest. Dr. Roddeston says the intention to close checkbooks is especially strong among dairy farmers. He says farmers see some headwinds they have to work through in the next year, such as dairy prices staying lower for longer. Dairy farmers are not expecting prices to bounce back quickly. This is reflected in their views about their spending on farms. They're going to cut down. Dr. Roddeston says many farmers don't have high hopes for the global dairy trade auction tonight, and many expect prices to continue to slide. The effects from last summer's drought were cited as another major reason confidence took a dip. The dry summer pushed many sheep and beef farmers to send more stock to slaughter earlier than usual, in turn reducing schedule prices. GDP growth was a mere 0.2%, below a consensus forecast of 0.6%, as forecasted by NBR in February. Dr. Roddeston says the effects will linger into this season and beyond, hence the drop in sentiment for sheep and beef farmers. Almost half of respondents expect their farm's profitability to get worse over the next year, and just 16% expect to increase production over the same period. This follows new numbers from Rabobank Rural Confidence Survey, which found confidence fell to a negative net reading of minus 45%. This was down from plus 13% in the March quarter, the lowest level the bank has measured since 2006. Is the Kiwi dollar a silver bullet? Dr. Roddeston says there is a silver lining in the survey results, and it comes in the form of a low Kiwi dollar. A silver lining has been a 12.5% drop in the New Zealand dollar since April, which should act as a buffer to weak world prices. This could fall to what would be more of a fair value given the 25% fall in world commodity prices since March 2014. But the New Zealand dollar may not be poised to go much lower, as reported by NBR yesterday. The all-time low level of New Zealand dollars in the world money market led ASB head of FX sales Tim Callagher to believe that even if New Zealand gets further poor economic data, the currency may not drop in value as much as it should, as the market is already short of Kiwi dollars.
I'm John Stewart. It's Wednesday the 15th. Despite the increasing number of new entrants into New Zealand's dairy industry, there's still insufficient competition for deregulation. Our reporter Jason Walls has been talking to Lincoln University Senior Lecturer in Agribusiness Management, Nick Lees. Jason, what did Professor Lees have to say?
Well, it's an interesting debate, actually, because, of course, Fonterra is the largest milk dairy company in New Zealand, and there's been some conversations lately going around with some of the smaller companies who have made submissions to the Commerce Commissions regarding the deregulation of some of Fonterra's some of the things that Fonterra do. So essentially what they've saying is that they think that the pool... Fonterra still have too much of supply, or have too much of the pool within New Zealand milk for.
What percentage do they have?
Well, at the moment it's an 86% share. It is worth noting that that's down from 96% in 2002. However, still having 86% share of one market is huge. In fact, you could almost call that a monopoly. And so, although the smaller players, there's more of them in there now, it's still too big, and Fonterra owns too much of it.
Right. Now, with these new players in the market, is that having any effect on the competition with Fonterra?
Well, it's hard to say at this point. I mean, it could be. We've seen that the current the current threshold for Fonterra is that it has an obligation to supply milk to the smaller competitors at least once. So that's about 20% of their supply can be taken by the competitors in both North and South Island. So Fonterra, obviously, this is not the greatest for them because it means they're supplying their competitors. However, their competitors kind of need this to stay afloat in this industry.
So the Commerce Commission basically is looking at whether the competition thresholds in the Act which set all this up, set Fonterra up, have been met.
Essentially, that's what they're looking at. I mean, it's the smaller companies that have made the submission, so they're just going over it at the moment to see if what they're saying is fair, and then more will come out in the future, which is the interesting part about this.
Now, NBR has done a subscriber poll on this issue. What was the result?
Well, I mean, we asked our subscribers, is there enough competition in the dairy industry to deregulate? And it was about 60% of our subscribers that took part in this poll said that there is actually not. And the other 40%, of course, said that they think there is. So there is a clear majority here that says there's not enough. There is not enough competition within the industry for deregulation to occur.
Jason, thanks very much for that.
NBR Radio. With Clooney Restaurant, an unparalleled private dining room choice. NBR Radio.
To the CPA defamation case, the New Zealand Institute of Chartered Accountants' defences against allegations of Defamation and Fair Trading Act breaches run the gamut from truth, genuine opinion and qualified privilege through to there being no pecuniary damage caused or that the offences were trivial. NZICA's barrister Bruce Gray QC argued in the Wellington High Court advertisements complained about by rival accounting organisation CPA Australia were mere puffery. But Alan Galbraith, QC representing CPA, said those advertisements which compared the two organisations using the words first class and second class were defamatory. Mr Galbraith said so were comments in two speeches by the Institute's Chief Operating Officer Kirsten Patterson, who implied CPA's education standards were inferior and that it was misspending members' funds on marketing as well as a flyer distributed to students at a university. Mr Gray urged Justice Robert Dobson to remember the statements complained about in the speeches were made to audiences largely made up of NZICA members, although he conceded there were some CPA members present, as well as some who didn't belong to either organisation. Mr Gray said there was also a mismatch between the audience for Ms Patterson's speeches and CPA's target market, new accountants who don't yet belong to either organisation. He also emphasised the fleeting nature of oral comments. He said much of the complaint is about semantics, the form versus the substance, he said, adding that the NZICA comments were about difference and not about superiority or inferiority. However, Mr Gray did argue NZICA's training, though more rigid than CPA's, aimed for a higher standard. The defendant, he said, says it offers an education program which it teaches to a high level. The plaintiff teaches to a standard which is perfectly adequate, he said. Justice Dobson has reserved his decision. And if you'd like to find out more that went on in court, nbr.co.nz. To Iran, 6 world powers have reached an historic agreement in Vienna with Iran that will prevent it from producing nuclear weapons in exchange for sanctions relief. The accord, which comes after a decade of diplomatic efforts that frequently appeared on the verge of collapse, should ease tensions between Iran and the West over a wide range of diplomatic and economic issues. The US, which was joined in the talks with the other 4 permanent US Security Council members, China, Russia, UK, France and Germany, broke diplomatic ties with Iran after the Islamic Revolution in 1979 and the seizing of hostages in the US Embassy. President Barack Obama, who has made rapprochement with Iran a key foreign policy goal, hailed the deal in an address from the White House and threatens to veto any vote in Congress against it. The deal needs to be approved by both houses in 60 days and could face opposition from the Republican majorities. The president said today, because America negotiated from a position of strength and principle, we have stopped the spread of nuclear weapons in this region. Because of this deal, the international community will be able to verify that the Islamic Republic of Iran will not develop a nuclear weapon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the deal a historic mistake. He said wide-ranging concessions were made in all of the areas which should have prevented Iran from getting the ability to arm itself with a nuclear weapon. The desire to sign an agreement was stronger than everything else. Opposition to a deal is strongest in Israel and the Gulf states led by Saudi Arabia. All have warned that lifting tight international sanctions will deliver an economic windfall that enables Iran to expand its regional influence by boosting funding for Islamic insurgencies in Syria, Lebanon, Yemen and elsewhere. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani also hailed the agreement, saying it met all his country's goals. He said in a nationally televised speech today, a new page has turned. At the heart of the agreement is Iran's acceptance of strict limits on its nuclear activities for 10 years. After that, those constraints will ease in the subsequent 5 years. In exchange, the US, the European Union and the UN will lift tight international sanctions, a move that could help Iran's economy to expand by 7 to 8% annually for years to come. Oil exports alone could quickly double by another 1 million barrels, while more than $100 billion US in oil revenues locked overseas under US sanctions will become available. Foreign Minister Murray McCulley says the agreement is a positive development for regional stability in the Middle East and will allow for further progress to be made in the relationship between New Zealand and Iran.
In privacy news, New Zealand companies will be asked to keep records of information requests by local law enforcement agencies in a drive to shed light on the extent government entities are seeking personal data. The Office of the Privacy Commissioner, John Edwards, has been working on a pilot transparency reporting project, which has revealed favourable feedback from its early group of stakeholders, and wants to expand that to help promote openness and accountability, he said in a speech to the annual New Zealand Institute of Intelligence Professionals conference being held in Wellington today. In his speech notes, Edwards said transparency reporting has the potential to increase public awareness of the information-gathering activities of law enforcement and security agencies, and encouraging companies that hold the information to be open with consumers about the limitations of confidentiality and the ways in which they cooperate with agents of the state. This year, we intend to trial asking companies to keep a standardised record of requests for information from law enforcement agencies and to report this information to us. We will then publish this information. Transparency reporting was initiated overseas by search engine giant Google after the US Department of Homeland Security relaxed prohibitions on doing so. That reporting has since been adopted by Microsoft, Facebook and Vodafone, and closer to home online auction site TradeMe has been publishing government agency information requests for the past 2 years. The Privacy Commissioner is working with 14 companies, including telecommunications providers, banks and online platforms, to develop an effective system and is seeking feedback on the trial. The Harvard Business Review reported in May that primary care doctors, payment or credit card firms and e-commerce firms topped the list of companies that were trusted to ensure personal data was never misused, while governments, media and entertainment groups and social media companies were the least trusted. A New Zealand Unisys survey of 500 people on data security released today showed respondents believe telecommunications companies, government agencies and banks were more likely to experience data breaches of personal information over the next 12 months than other types of organisations, while airlines were seen as the safest receptacles of private data. Speaking on the sidelines of the NZIIP conference, Human Rights Chief Commissioner David Rutherford told Business Desk the biggest threat to people's privacy was how they signed up to online and mobile applications, with New Zealanders largely complacent about the information they freely share. He said businesses were aware of those risks because if your customers lose trust in you, you lose value.
NBR Radio. Free to air online. NBR, the meeting place of intelligent business.